And the question is this: what is your distinguishing idea, distinguishing from all of the others on this stage, about how to create jobs in this country, how to bring jobs back from overseas, and if you will, how many jobs do you think you can create, and how long will that take? And Speaker Gingrich, will you lead us off?
Well, I think that there's a clear record. I worked with Ronald Reagan in the early 80s. His recovery program translated into today's population will be about 25 million new jobs in a 7-year period. As Speaker of the House, I worked with President Clinton and following a very similar plan, and we ended up with about 11 million new jobs in a 4-year period. Went down to 4.2% unemployment. Starts very simply: taxes, lower taxes, less regulation, an American energy plan, and actually be positive about people who create jobs. The opposite of the Obama plan, which is higher taxes, more regulation, no American energy, and attack people who create jobs with class warfare. So I think there are a number of steps you can take. I would start with zero capital gains, hundreds of billions of dollars are poured into the country. I'd go to a 12.5% corporate tax rate. That would bring at least $700 billion in repatriated money back from overseas. I would then go to 100% expensing for all new equipment, abolish, which means that you'd write it off in 1 year, and I'd abolish the death tax permanently. Those steps would begin to dramatically create jobs.
Your response?
Now, just a second. You had 4 allegations. Do I get 4 responses?
Take your time.
Okay. Let's start with the last one. Let's be candid. The only reason you didn't become a career politician is you lost to Teddy Kennedy in 1994.
Well, now wait a second. Now wait a second. Now wait a second.
I mean,
let him. You'll get
ahead.
Another response.
Okay.
Go ahead.
do I get to go ahead?
Go, please.
No, and I'm just saying. I looked at it. I thought, you know, I'm a citizen. I've served the country in many ways. You're a citizen. You served the country in many ways. But it's a bit much. You'd have been a 17-year career politician by now if you'd won. That's all I'm saying on that one. Now, number 2. I'm proud of trying to find things that give young people a reason to study science and math and technology, and telling them that someday in their lifetime they could dream of going to the moon, they could dream of going to Mars. I grew up in a generation where the space program was real, where it was important, and where, frankly, it is tragic that NASA has been so bureaucratized. Iowa State's a perfect example. Iowa State's doing brilliant things, attracting brilliant students. I want to give them places to go and things to do, and I'm happy to defend the idea that America should be in space and should be there in an aggressive entrepreneurial way. Third, as to schools, I think virtually every person up here worked at a young age. What I suggested was kids ought to be allowed to work part-time in school, particularly in the poorest neighborhoods, both because they could use the money. If you take 1/2 of the New York janitors who are unionized and paid more than the teachers, an entry-level janitor gets paid twice as much as an entry-level teacher. You take half those janitors, you could give lots of poor kids a work experience in the cafeteria, in the school library, in the front office, in a lot of different things. I'll stand by the idea young people ought to learn how to work. Middle-class kids do it routinely. We should give poor kids the same chance to pursue happiness. Finally, on capital gains net, I asked you about this at Dartmouth. I'm astonished. You're a businessman. You want to create jobs. A $200,000 cap on your capital gains tax cut is lower than Obama. Now, you know, if you really want to create jobs, you want to encourage the people who make more than $200,000 who actually have capital to invest the capital in the U.S. I'll stick with zero capital gains. We'll create vastly more jobs than your proposal.
Governor.
Well, first of all, as you say normally in your own speeches, the housing bubble came from the Federal Reserve inflating the money supply. Now, that's the core of the housing bubble. And I happen to be with you on auditing the Fed and frankly, on firing Bernanke. Second, I was never a spokesman for any agency. I never did any lobbying for any agency. I offered strategic advice. I was in the private sector, and I was doing things in the private sector.
Not the private sector.
And when you're in the private sector and you have a company and you offer advice, like McKinsey does, like a bunch of other companies do, you're allowed to charge money for it.
What about it?
That's called free enterprise.
It's the taxpayers' money, though. We had to bail these people out.
Well, I'm not for bailing them out. In fact, I'm for breaking them up.
So let's get both gentlemen a chance to respond. Speaker Gingrich, you go first because you were invoked twice, also on the lobbying, and then Governor Romney. Right. Go ahead.
Well, Michelle, you know, a lot of what you say just isn't true. Period. I oppose cap and trade. I testified against it. the same day that Al Gore testified for it. I helped defeat it in the Senate through American Solutions. It is simply untrue. I fought against Obamacare at every step of the way. I did. The Center for Health Transformation was actively opposed. We actively campaigned against it. You know, I think it's important for you, and this is a fair game, and everybody gets to pick fights. It's important that you be accurate when you say these things. Those are not true. And most of the money I made, frankly, I made in ways that are totally and had nothing to do with anything you've described. I did no lobbying, no representation, and frankly, my speech money and other things I did that had nothing to do with that was a lot larger source of income. So, you know, I have had 24 books and I've had 13 New York Times bestsellers. Now, that was not people who wanted influence running around buying my books. I know that doesn't fit your model. It happens to be true.
Governor, if we could ask Speaker Gingrich to respond.
I just want to make one point that's historical. In 1993, in fighting Hillary Care, virtually every conservative saw the mandate as a less dangerous future than what Hillary was trying to do. The Heritage Foundation was a major advocate of it. But after Hillary Care disappeared, it became more and more obvious that mandates have all sorts of problems built into them. People gradually tried to find other techniques. I frankly was floundering, trying to find a way to make sure that people who could afford it were paying their hospital bills while still leaving it out for libertarians to not buy insurance. And that's what we were wrestling with. It's now clear that the mandate, I think, is clearly unconstitutional, but it started as a conservative effort to stop Hillary Care in the 1990s.
Should voters consider marital fidelity when making their choices for president? Speaker Gingrich, what do voters need to know about this issue from your perspective?
Well, first of all, I think it is a real issue. I think people have to look at the person to whom they're going to loan the presidency. And they have the right to ask every single question. They have to have a feeling that this is a person that they can trust to the level of power we give to the presidency. And I think that's a very, very important issue. And I think people have to render judgment. In my case, I've said up front openly, I've made mistakes at times. I've had to go to God for forgiveness. I've had to seek reconciliation. But I'm also a 68-year-old grandfather. And I think people have to measure who I am now and whether I'm a person they can trust. And all I can tell you is that, you know, I am delighted at the way people have been willing to look at who I am, to look at what my record has been, and the amount of support we're getting from the American people and from all across the state of Iowa, the number of people who are supportive of a candidacy of real change and a record of real change.
And I'd like to turn now, if we can, to the issue of immigration. And so many people talk about it in their living rooms, talk about it around their dinner tables at night, if I can. And could we just do one thing for the interest of time? Can we stipulate that every single person on this stage tonight has said the number one thing to do is secure the borders? Secure the borders, secure the borders, secure the borders. You may have slightly different prescriptions to do it, but we stipulate that that's what you all want to do first. I'd like to turn now to the question of the 11 million undocumented people in this country. And Speaker Gingrich, I'm going to come back to you because you have talked about citizen review boards to review individual cases, to treat it on an individual basis. You mentioned the fact that someone who's been here 25 years, served the community, should get special consideration under this board. How many years is the threshold for you? If they're here 5 years, but has served the community under the criteria that you set out before, 5 years, also a candidate?
I think, first of all, that anybody who would apply to the Citizen Review Board idea came out of the selective service model that was used as draft boards in World War II. We relied on local citizens to render judgment about who ought to be deferred, who ought to be drafted, because they had local knowledge. That's the starting point. Second, I started with cases that I think are very hard to argue about. Somebody who's been here 25 years, somebody who has been a good local citizen, may well belong to your church, has children and grandchildren in the United States. And I'll just say flatly, I do not believe the people of the United States are going to send the police in to rip that kind of person out and ship them out of this country, particularly because those are precisely people who are going to end up in churches as sanctuaries. And I think we ought to be honest about that. I think most of the workers who are here who have no ties to us should go home immediately. I think we should make deportation dramatically easier, just as I think, frankly, we ought to make English the official language of government, and we ought to have an effective guest worker program with very severe penalties for those employers who hire people illegally.
But the Pew Center, the Hispanic Center, as you know, has said that maybe 3.5 million people could come under the criteria that you laid out.
I don't think there are 3.5 million people who've been here 25 years.
But they're talking about people who've been here 15 years. 15 years.
Well, I wasn't. They were. You used a number that doesn't relate to my proposal.
But under the criteria that you have set out, do you have a threshold on the number of people you would consider before the review?
Well, that's why you have the citizen review panel. If the person has to have been here 25 years, have genuine ties to the community, be a good citizen, and have an American family sponsoring them, and they still don't get citizenship. This is not amnesty. They get residency, and they pay a penalty in order to get residency.
I want to change subjects now because foreign policy issue. Speaker Gingrich caused something of a stir overnight in the Middle East with comments he made in an interview with the Jewish channel in which he called the Palestinians an invented people. And this has caused quite a reaction in the Middle East. The chief Palestinian negotiator, Saeb Erekat, said, "Mark my words, these statements of Gingrich will be the ammunition and weapons of the bin Ladens and the extremists for a long, long time."
How would he know the difference? Let me start, George, simply. Is what I said factually correct? Yes. Is it historically true? Yes. Are we in a situation where every day rockets are fired into Israel while the United States, the current administration, tries to pressure the Israelis into a peace process? Hamas does not admit the right of Israel to exist and says publicly not a single Jew will remain. The Palestinian Authority ambassador to India said last month there is no difference between Fatah and Hamas. We both agree Israel has no right to exist. Somebody ought to have the courage to tell the truth. These people are terrorists. They teach terrorism in their schools. They have textbooks that say if there are 13 Jews and 9 Jews are killed, how many Jews are left? We pay for those textbooks through our aid money. It's fundamentally time for somebody to have the guts to stand up and say, enough lying about the Middle East.
Governor Romney. He says this is going to make life more difficult for the Israelis.
The Israelis are getting rocketed every day. We're not making life more difficult. The Obama administration is making life more difficult. The fact is, the Palestinian claim to a right of return is based on a historically false story. Somebody ought to have the courage to go all the way back to the 1921 League of Nations mandate for a Jewish homeland, point out the context in which Israel came into existence, and Palestinian did not become a common term until after 1977. This is a propaganda war in which our side refuses to engage, and we refuse to tell the truth while the other side lies, and you're not going to win in the long run if you're afraid to stand firm and stand for the truth.
I want to turn, if I can, to...
Can I just say one last thing? Because I didn't speak for the people of Israel. I spoke as a historian who has looked at the world stage for a very long time. I've known Bibi since 1984. I feel quite confident an amazing number of Israelis found it nice to have an American tell the truth about the war they're in the middle of and the casualties they're taking and the people who surround them who say you do not have the right to exist and we want to destroy you. I think sometimes it is helpful to have a President of the United States with the courage to tell the truth, just as it was Ronald Reagan, who went around his entire national security apparatus to call the Soviet Union an evil empire, and who overruled his entire State Department in order to say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Reagan believed the power of truth restated the world and reframed the world. I'm a Reaganite. I'm proud to be a Reaganite. I will tell the truth, even if it's at the risk of causing some confusion sometimes with the timid.
I think it's important to get everybody on this.
Many of us are forced to make cuts to continue necessities such as mortgage payments, groceries, transportation to work, and health care. And then the question continues. They want to know, when is the last time you had a personal financial strain that forced you not only to give up a luxury, but also to cut back on necessity? And what were the consequences you faced? This is from Andrew in Texas.
Speaker Gingrich.
Well, let me say, first of all, that when I was young, we lived in an apartment above a gas station on the square in Homostown, Pennsylvania. I had relatives who were steel workers, others who were delivery men, some who worked in department stores. My dad was in the Army, and we moved around, and he lived on the pay of a junior officer at a time when it was fairly frugal, but you didn't feel desperate. Today, I've had several relatives in the last 3 years who've been out of work, who've had to go through very difficult times. My wife, Callista, runs Gingrich Productions as a company. It's a very small company. It does basically movies and books and things like that. We have to meet a payroll. We have to find markets. We have to find, go through everything that small businesses go through. And I know how difficult this economy is at a practical level if you're a small business. I think, first of all, for the federal government to do it is unconstitutional because it means a Congress which could compel you to purchase this item could compel you to purchase any item. And so the question of freedom would be missed, and any majority could then decide to make you do virtually anything. I think that's part of why you're seeing a dramatic shift back towards limiting the federal government and towards imposing the 10th Amendment as a very serious barrier. I've been working on health issues since 1974, and I tried to find a way to break out of where we are, because the fact is the whole third-party payment model, whether public or private, has grown more and more expensive, more and more difficult to sustain. I helped found the Center for Health Transformation that, for that reason, wrote a book called Saving Lives and Saving Money back in 2002. We need to fundamentally rethink the entire health system to move back towards a doctor-patient relationship and back towards something like what Rick Santorum talked about with health savings accounts, where people are directly engaged in their own health and in taking care of themselves to a much greater degree than they are in the current insurance system.
Tell us the one thing you've learned from someone else, one of your challengers on stage.
Mr. Speaker.
Well, I want to cite two people, one on the stage and one not. Governor Terry Branstad is my role model. Get out of politics for a while, do something else, be involved in health care, come back when you're clearly too old, too experienced, too tied to the past, win the governorship decisively, do a great job. I just want to cite two other people very briefly. Rick Perry got me engaged about 3 years ago on this whole 10th Amendment in a big, serious way. And I think that he has helped ignite a fire that is going to change America. And Rick Santorum's consistency and courage on Iran has been a hallmark of why, if we do survive, it will be in part because of people like Rick who have had the courage to tell the truth about the Iranians for a long time. Some people say the America we know and love is a thing of the past. I don't believe that. Because working together, I know we can rebuild America. We can revive our economy and create jobs, shrink government and the regulations that strangle our businesses, throw out the tax code and replace it with one that is simple and fair. We can regain the world's respect by standing strong again, being true to our faith, and respecting one another. We can return power to the people and to the states we live in, so we'll all have more freedom, opportunity, and control of our lives. Yes, working together, we can and will rebuild the America we love. I'm Newt Gingrich, and I approve this message.